Greetings, HD students, and welcome to chapter number 14. Woo, happy chapter 14. All right, so let's start talking about adolescence, but before we jump in there, I want to do a quick review. So let's kind of go through our human development theories. Remember we said during our time together, we're always going to talk about 5 different theories. We call them the grand theories. The first one, the psychoanalytic theory. It's a fancy word, but it really kind of means emotional and psychological. So what is going on developmentally? And we talk about 2 theorists. We talk about Sigmund Freud a little bit. We talk about Erik Erikson a lot, right? He's the trust versus mistrust guy. So the psychoanalytic theory. We also talk about behaviorism and the social learning theory. So remember, we talk about, how we can create behavior in children or in others with rewards and punishments, and how we learn from models or from observing people. Okay? Then we talk about cognitive theory, and that is only related to the theorist Piaget. So Piaget is the cognitive theorist who tells us that at different ages, our mind is in different stages of development. And there's some things we can and can't do at those stages. Then we talk about the sociocultural theory, and that is Vygotsky. And so Vygotsky says, hey, we are products of our environment. We are products of the people who raised us, of our socioeconomic status, of the neighborhood we grew up in. It's all about that. And Maslow would kind of say the opposite. He would say, we're first and foremost humans. And so that whole culture, social thing, first is genetics. And so we don't ascribe or prescribe to one of them. We really look at all 5 of them every time that we're talking. And so today we're going to start talking about the biosocial or physical development of adolescence. And with starting adolescence comes puberty. So puberty is the time when basically a child goes from being a child to more of an adult in terms of size, shape, and sexuality. You notice it doesn't say becomes an adult as far as emotions, because they haven't developed that yet. You cannot expect the same even level of thinking or emotions from a 12-year-old as you can a 35-year-old. You just can't. And so, but it does change physically. It changes in shape and an awakening of sexuality, and we'll talk about that. I know some of you are already cringing, ew, I'm not going to like this, but you know what? We are still going to talk about it. All right, here we go. So when does puberty start? Really, we say for girls, it starts when they have their first period, right? And so when the body has signaled this process coming in, where we're going to start to be able to have a monthly period, which means that girls can conceive a child. That's what that means. And for boys, it is going to be when they have their first ejaculation, not erection. Because I remember my 4-year-old boy talking to me about, hey, my penis is growing. He wouldn't say penis. He would say, hey, Mom, look, it's growing, right? So boys can have erections from young toddler years, but when they have their first ejaculation, that is typically signaling puberty, right? And I'm going to talk more about how we deal with some of those things. And again, I'll bet some of you are going, oh, I think I'm going to skip this video. Oh, this makes me so uncomfortable because in my home, we didn't talk about these things. However, that's why we're going to talk about them, because I want you to be able to talk about them with your kids in a healthy way. We don't need to shy away from things that are completely biological. They happen to all of us, right? So here we continue on. So why does puberty happen? Well, what happens is kind of like this hormone, again, we have this like download of hormones that happens. And so it's like your body's internal clock signals that there's going to be all these changes going on. And they're going to happen because these chemicals, these hormones, which are these little chemical substances, are going to affect us. Our hormones regulate everything. They regulate, again, how you sleep. What mood are you in? Are you hungry right now? Are you stressed out? Are you horny? A lot of this is regulated by our hormones, and they play a huge role. And that pituitary gland is kind of like, we'll talk about the hypothalamus and how we mentioned before, how it releases those hormones. And as we see from this slide here again, the hypothalamus, our hormones are going through our pituitary gland, which then again, depending on if you're female or male, it's kind of releasing either estrogen or testosterone. Sleepyheads. We find that our adolescents, our high school age kids, or junior high school, I should say, 12 to 18, like to sleep, right? And right, think of your teenager, 15, 16-year-old, they want to, on Saturday, don't come in before noon, right? My kids like to sleep in on the weekends. And so unfortunately, though, what we're seeing is that our young people are spending a lot of time sleeping and not sleeping, and it's affecting their performances, whether it's academic, social, whatever it be. When I ask my high school students, because I teach college classes at high schools also, when I ask them, like, why is it you went to bed at 2 a.m.? They say, well, I was just like Netflixing. I was just like on gaming online, It's not because like some adults who may be working 2 or 3 jobs and they don't get enough sleep because they're working or things of that nature. Our young people make these choices about what to do with their time, and that is not always productive or a good thing, right? All right, so again, our kids are going through this emotional development. We talked before about how our younger kids just kind of say whatever comes to mind, and they can't hide their emotions because it just comes right on out. And our young people are still in somewhat of that situation where they don't have complete emotional control. So it's not fully developed, and that's why they take things to heart. So a breakup, a romantic breakup, is devastating to them. The end of the world has happened, right? When there's even breakup of friendships, or when your friend turns on you and sides with other friends, or things of that nature. That's why I say here, think once before you act, twice before you speak, because our words are very powerful, and think 3 times before you post it on Facebook, because people will see it. And sometimes in anger or in a state emotionally, we'll say something mean or post something that we shouldn't. And then even when we take it down later, it's been out there, right? So just being aware and careful. Risk and reward. So again, our brain, our prefrontal cortex is still not fully developed. So our kids like some of these behaviors that are what we call risk and reward behaviors. Loud music, speeding cars, doing drugs, they're kind of maybe sometimes drawn to these things. They are enticing, especially if you come from a parent that's very strict and maybe you haven't had exposure to some of these things. And so we need to understand that until we're actually in our early 20s, that prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the decision-making part of our brain, is not fully developed. This is why even your 19 and 20-year-olds still make dumb decisions, right? You still might get a call from the police station because they got a DUI, or they did something that, was just not wise. And part of it being, they can't blame it on just the development of their brain not be fully developed until their early 20s, but they have to accept responsibility for that. But this is some of the reasons why. Right, so when does puberty really begin when we talk about ages here? So we typically say between the age of 8 to 14 is times when puberty can happen, with the averages being 11 and 12. So 11 and 12 really is the time that we start to see our young people go through that. 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, maybe some of those times. Typically girls ahead of boys, as we mentioned before, when it comes to that rush of hormones or onslaught of hormones. Body fat does influence when children will start puberty, either earlier or later. The body, again, needs to understand for girls that it's going to go through a real hormonal change and losing blood, becoming anemic, as we mentioned, once a month. And so it wants the girl to be weighing at a higher weight. So girls who are very slight, or maybe they're weighing in at 70 pounds or so, they may not actually experience puberty till they're a little older, because their body wants them to be more developed in that way. Stress can actually be a factor when it comes to when your kids do or don't start puberty. So puberty comes early if your child, or if your child is experiencing something at home that is stressful. So if mom and dad going through divorce, a breakup, or there's just yelling in the home, or there's instability in the home, excuse me, moving around, all of these things can cause them to excuse me, alter the time that they would normally go through puberty. In addition, their friends can have a really big impact on that, right? So similar to when we have women, like if you have a home where there's a lot of women living in the home, we tend to say that what happens is their menstrual cycle, their period syncs up, meaning that they tend to start having their period around the same time every month. It's almost like the hormones talk to each other, right? And it's kind of similar with your young people and their friends. Them spending time with their friends actually might do something similar to having that sync up process, and they might start earlier or later. All right, early maturing girls, and get a mention here, this is something that we in our Western society in particular are really heavily influenced by. So I challenge you just to look at the magazines and the billboards and the Kardashians and everything on TV and media and all that you see, and see what is the message that we send our 12-year-old girls or our 13-year-old girls or our young girls. We send this message that you should be sexy. We send a message that you should be wearing lots of makeup by now, that you should be looking not 12 and not 13. Your goal is to look like you're 18. And so if we look at these pictures, we can see girls, even though they're the same age, depending on their attire, their hairstyle, all of those things reflect an age or a sexuality. And we see this pressure, tremendous pressure by our girls to look sexy, because we're a very sexualized nation. That's what we are. And I'm going to just say right here again and remind you of your role as a parent. Your role as a parent is to try to keep your child the age they are in every respect. So your 12-year-old should look 12. Yeah. And this is where you may need to put your foot down. You may need to say, I don't think so, right? So for instance, as my oldest daughter got older in years, she would go shopping on her own and buy some items at Forever 21 or wherever, come home, and if she was going to go somewhere, and if I felt that her outfit made her look sexy, or if it made her look 21 when she's 17, I'm not going to let her leave the house with it on. And her argument might be, but I bought this with my own money. You're right. Unfortunately, you can take it back, get your own money back. But you know what? As long as it's mom's home, mom makes the rules. And my rule is I don't want a 21-year-old guy looking at you. I don't. You're 17. And so you need to be 17 and stay 17. You can look nice. You can look cute. You can look classy, whatever. You can look all those things, but you can't be revealing skin or revealing things that because you want to attract people for those reasons. Because now we're talking about self-confidence issues. Now we're talking about, why do you want to look sexy? Why do you feel you need to? Do you think a guy would only like you if you're burying your midriff or if you're doing things like that? So if you raise kids with a healthy, good self-esteem, it helps you to battle some of this. But I'm really going to encourage you to put your foot down, because I think this is where we get into issues with your girls not feeling good about themselves because they feel like they need to look a certain way or behave a certain way to attract attention from others that really they shouldn't be at their age. So, just keep them their age. That's it. And boys kind of have some similar experiences, right? So boys, right, early and late maturing boys. Early maturing boys are more aggressive, law-breaking, alcohol abusing than late maturing boys, right? So, they shouldn't feel that they need to look a certain way or there's lots of complexes that are going to happen with your boys during this time. We'll talk a little more about that. One of them is going through this growth spurt, in particular more for boys than girls. Because what will happen is it'll be like a summer or a matter of a few months, and all of a sudden your son goes from being, 5'2", and there's this shooting up, and all of a sudden they're like 5'7", or they're whatever. They grow. And you have to remember that I think it's kind of comical, because sometimes you'll see an adolescent boy walking, and it's almost like he trips over his own feet. He's stumbling because he was a size 9 shoe, and now he's a 12. And it's like his brain and body is trying to process fitting into the size he is. It's kind of like I equate it to if you drive a certain car. So if you drive a little small car, you're used to parking in the parking spaces, and you know how your car fits in that parking space. And then you go and you buy a minivan. And all of a sudden you go to try to park like you used to, and it's like, oh no, I need to go slower, I need to turn out more, because you're not used to the size of vehicle that you're trying to park in the same space. Well, it's similar to what boys go through in this growth spurt, right? They're trying to match the body size that spurted up really quickly. So this is a normal thing. They're going to have an Adam's apple develop here. Their voice is going to change. There might be some whiskers going on. And this is a lot to process. So kind of what happens during this transformation of puberty? First, typically our kids will gain weight. Then they might sprout up a little bit and gain height. And then we will have some definition or muscle forming in their bodies. That's typically the process that we see. What's going on internally inside of our adolescent's body? The lungs are going to triple in weight. So that means that this is where we develop some more endurance. Our heart is going to double in size. And so that's going to be good for our blood pressure, because now our heart has to pump blood to get not from 5'2", but to 5'7". And it's got to get that blood all the way up there to provide oxygen to all the cells. Right? So a lot is going on here. This is probably what we remember about high school or about the teen years, right? And that's the changes in our skin and our hair. The big one is skin. So our skin becomes oily, sweaty, and more prone to acne. This is hormonal. This is this shift that's happening in your body that's dumping all these hormones, and you have acne. My son really struggled with acne, and it was just a killer because it bothered him so much, because it bothers you. When you go to school, you feel like when someone's talking to you, they're staring at that pimple on my face, or the multiple pimples on my face, right? You feel like that's where their attention is going, and you want to fit in and look good. And so that is a real big issue. So again, if your kids go through that, there's lots we can do. Talk to your pediatrician. There's definitely, and I'm not talking about, because I wasn't keen on Retin-A or on retinol or any of those Accutane. Those are pretty heavy drugs that will really make some huge adjustments to a child's body, and they are necessary for certain kids. But for a lot of them, there's just actually some face wash and some things that we can do that clears up that acne, because it is hormonal. So we need to balance the hormones. Our hair is changing. The thickness, the coarseness of our hair might feel different. All of a sudden we have hair in places where there didn't used to be hair. It's like, what is this, right? Yeah, so make sure that I'll talk to you in a minute about how we can explain some of these things to your kids, because it's kind of scary if we don't expect it and then it happens and we're like, why is there hair there? Is that normal? Is that right? Am I good? Am I bad? I don't know. Well, we as parents should talk about that. So our deficiencies in nutrients, again, talking about our adolescents. And so we're going to see that our kids don't do so well at this age at picking foods. Deficiencies include iron, calcium, and zinc, along with some others. So this is pretty scary. Only 15% of our young people or adolescents, 12 to 18, consume the recommended 3 servings of vegetables per day. That means 85% did not or do not. That's big. That means they're not getting their veggies, because what do your kids pick when they go to school? I mean, they're going to pick the vending machine Doritos and a Red Bull. That's what they're going to pick. And neither of those are primarily healthy for you, right? So mom or dad, guardian, it's up to you to make sure that you cook vegetables at night and give them triple servings. So making sure that you're figuring out how to get vegetables into their day. You know, my kids struggle with vegetables sometimes. So I buy this drink. It's called V8. And it tastes like, I want to say it tastes like strawberry bananas or something, but it's a full serving of vegetables in a glass. And so that's one of the things that I do. I let my kids drink is a V8 drink, because it has a full serving of vegetables. And then I make sure that we have our broccoli or whatever we're having for dinner. Well, let's talk about this. So again, during these, think back on your high school or teen years and how important was the way you presented yourself. How important, or how did you compare yourself to others when it came to physical beauty? It's really big time. So whether we're looking at girls or teenagers, you know, how you see yourself in the mirror, how you present, whether you have acne, whether you're happy with your features, all of those things, we're going to see that these play huge roles. Not only with physical, our face, but our body image. We are so concerned about our shape. And a big part of that because people make fun of us. Whether they make fun of us because they think we're overweight or underweight, they're going to make fun of us, and this is devastating to our self-esteem. So your body image is your idea of how you see yourself. And, we know this from research, girls diet, partly because they believe here in the West that boys prefer girls to be thin. In other cultures, they don't. They like curvy women. They like women in a certain way that is not this Western ideal of size 2. Right? Boys want to look taller and stronger because they think girls like muscles. Right? And so we're doing all that. But what's fascinating is to learn that unhappiness with your physical appearance is a worldwide phenomenon. Not just here in the US or in the West, but all over the world. All of us have issues. Right? All of us think, I wish my nose was smaller. Oh, all of us think, I wish my eyebrows weren't one unibrow and there was 2 of them. All of us think, man, I wish my eyes were blue, wish my eyes were brown or green. All of us think, we're ugly in some way. We're unhappy with ourselves. And so I think the more you understand that it's very common for us, the more we can deal with that. So whether, again, it's our girls trying to be thin, or it's our boys who say, you know what? Kin look pretty good, right? Girls are trying to aspire to Barbie, who is completely unrealistic in her dimensions. And boys are like, I need a 6-pack like Ken, right? That's what I'm supposed to look like. So there's pressure for me to look like Ken. Neither one of these good, right? Neither one of these being a good thing. All right, so here's some of the conditions we need to be concerned about during this age. During this time is when we see this come about. The first one's anorexia nervosa. Anorexia is basically a condition of self-starvation. To me, it takes a tremendous amount of willpower to starve yourself. I challenge you to skip dinner, then skip breakfast tomorrow, skip lunch, and see if your stomach, first of all, is going to give you some feedback and growl. Then your head's going to hurt, and you're going to be miserable and grumpy, right? Because your body needs food. It wants food. And so for you to have the willpower to self-starve it's amazing. It really is. With both of these conditions, both anorexia and bulimia, they are in the DSM-5. So the DSM-5 is our book of really mental health issues or conditions. So these are both mental health disorders. And what happens is the person that has the disease, when they look in the mirror, even though they're weighing in at 85 pounds, when they look in the mirror, they see 500 pounds. Their brain is distorted in the image that it sees. And doesn't matter how many of their family members tell them they're beautiful or they look good, they can't change that. The only thing you can do is counseling. They need a therapist. They need intense therapy to assist with changing the way the brain is working. Bulimia is a little different from anorexia. Bulimics like food. Yeah, they don't want to self-starve. They like the taste. They like to eat food, right? But what do they typically do after they eat? They purge. So bulimics will enjoy a dinner, a meal. They may even gorge, like eat a lot, right? And then what will happen is they will go to the bathroom and they will either throw it up or use laxatives or something of that nature, but they're going to get the food out of their body before it can be absorbed and digested in the small intestine. And so we see some health complications from bulimics. What do we see? So think about it. We're going to see some teeth issues. My children's dentist always tells me he can spot young people because it's typically around the age of 10, 11, 12, 13 that we start to see this manifest, bulimia and anorexia. And so he says, I can spot the girls because what's happened is the back of their teeth underneath has eroded. Because remember, what happens is every time that you go to put food in your mouth, you signal your saliva and you signal the body that food's coming. Get ready. And so your body starts to produce bile and acids that will break down your foods in your small intestine. And what happens is that acid and bile gets ready. And then when bulimics throw up their food, what happens is all of that bile and acid comes up with it. And so it travels back up your esophagus and out your mouth, and it's coming out through your teeth. And so you are eroding the inside of your teeth. So you're going to have some teeth issues because that acid and bile are frequently, daily, possibly, doing that. In addition, you're going to have some esophageal problems, meaning your throat here, esophagus. We see a lot of esophageal cancer because this esophagus is meant to have just food go down. It's not meant to have acid and bile come up. And so when that's constantly going up and down there, it's eroding or causing problems with that. So we see that. What health problem do we see from anorexia? We see a big one. It's called death. Yeah, anorexics basically can starve themselves to death. It's a really big concern when you have this condition. Both of these conditions need to see some professional. They need to see professional help, right? There's a really good movie on Netflix called To the Bone, and I encourage you to watch it. It's a really good movie about a young girl that has anorexia, and it talks about how the body will fight to protect itself because you are not putting weight or nutrients into your body, and your arms actually grow more hair. And so they become pretty hairy because the body is saying, I'm so cold because there's no fat. You aren't eating enough to get any fat on your body, and so it's like bone and skin, and it's trying to protect itself. And so it's a really good movie. All right, sexual activity. So we see here, boys are influenced more by hormones and girls by culture, meaning girls are influenced in the culture of our day, and is it okay to have sex at my age or at this time or not, right? They're influenced by kind of society's culture. Both are influenced by hormones in general. But here's the good thing, a couple of different things that are really maybe positive in some way. The double standard has narrowed in every ethnic group. So what's the double standard? The double standard would say something like, if you had a teenage son and a teenage daughter, you would say to your son, hey son, you going out this weekend? You gonna get some? Yeah, you knocking that girl up? All right, yeah. You would encourage your son, or when your son shares his sexual exploits with you, it was an thumbs up type of a thing. However, your daughter, she better not ever spread her legs for anyone, right? Because she's a whore if she does. So why is it your son is okay with having sex with girls, but your daughter can't have sex? That's a double standard. Saying that the same activity is wrong for one and okay, right for the other, right? That's narrowed, meaning that we're getting to be where we treat boys and girls similar when it comes to sexual activity. And so, I think it's a positive thing in the sense that we don't have that real sexism that was apparent in our families. Another more positive issue is that compared to 20 years ago, our young couples, right, 12 to 18, are actually less sexually active than they were 20 years ago. That's kind of contrary to what you and I would think, right? We would think that, oh man, today everyone's doing it, right? They're all having sex everywhere, right? A lot more than they used to. They're not. And so that means maybe we're doing a good job at education. Maybe we're doing a good job in our culture, changing some of its views on young sex. We're talking about under the age of 18. Right? All right, so our sexual activity, again, we're going to see lots of changes in our bodies going on. And here's what we're going to say about sex. So whether or not you teach your children or advise your children to have sex and at what age you advise that, your values around sex is personal. I really cannot dictate to you what you should or shouldn't do. What I can share with you is some of what we know, and that is intercourse or having sex before age 14 is related to depression and drug use in young people. Because here's my thing. My thing is, yes, I believe physically young people can have sex. I don't think they're ready emotionally. I don't. I think even your 15-year-old, trying to process sex is not just a physical act. There is emotions that come with it. And those emotions are hard to deal with at younger ages because it really wasn't meant that we were doing that, right? And so I'm just going to advise you to be really, really careful about that. Be aware, have conversation, and we'll talk more about, if you say, I don't know how to talk to my kids about sex, well, we'll talk about that shortly. All right, so again, just kind of pointing out to you, you can read that later. I said there's a decline in our couples having sex, and that's good. So hazards related to adolescent sexual activity. Earlier puberty and weaker social taboos encourage sex at earlier ages. We don't want that, right? Early sex correlates with depression and drug use. We don't want that either. Increased complexity and expense are related to parenting. In other words, we really don't want our 16-year-olds having babies. They're still minors. They're still children. And we don't want that, right? And then it's more common and dangerous for them to get STIs or sexually transmitted infections. right? So we used to call them STDs, we call them STIs now, but basically having conversations and understanding about how these are spread is really important to do with your adolescents. So can you get an STI from oral sex? Yes or no? Yeah, you can. And so this is where you need to educate your young people and letting them know if you engage in anal, vaginal, or oral sex, you can have an STD. There is only one way to make sure you do not get a sexually transmitted infection, and that is through abstinence, right? Abstinence meaning you don't do it, right? So abstinence you withhold from, do not have sex, right? And condoms we'll talk about. Yes, we can use condoms, but there's some hazards to do with that too, right? This is fascinating. Condom use among our 15-year-old 10th graders. So remember, I like to show you slides that talk about different countries and different value systems, but look at this slide. So we're talking about our 10th graders, and we're talking about how many are the percent of 10th graders that are sexually active, and of those that are sexually active, how many are using condoms, right? So look at the countries here on the left-hand side. Which country has the lowest percentage of their 15-year-olds having sex? Looking at the slide here, wow, looking at Israel, 14% only. It means 86% are not having sex, right? 15-year-olds, that's pretty good, right? Which country has the highest proportion of 10th graders having sex? Again, the US of A is the winner, with 41% of our 10th graders being sexually active. Now, of those that are sexually active, which country has the highest percentage of their 10th graders using condoms or having used a condom? Man, those are some impressive numbers for England and France. England and France, you got 83, 84% of your 15-year-old boys putting on a condom? Pretty awesome, right? Which country has the lowest percentage of their sexually active teenagers using condoms? Again, the US of A. So we have the highest percent sexually engaged, and then we have the lowest percent of that group putting on a condom. So we have some work to do. We have some real work to do in education and in the values that we're placing around sex at young ages. We're talking about minors here. Sexual abuse. So sexual abuse typically is perpetrated or committed by those who are close to us. So it is likely that our family members are likely to be the abusers. In other words, it's the kind of the anomaly or the outlier that you're walking down the street and somebody just drives up, throws you in the car, and they sexually abuse you. It's a stranger, right? That does happen. However, statistically, it's much, much greater possibility that it's your uncle, that it's your father, that it's your stepfather, that it's your pastor, that it's somebody that you know, much more likely. Victims are isolated and uninformed, and this abuse will continue on. I think what a big change, or why we're talking about it like now too at this age, is because we just talked about puberty. And puberty is a time when girls' and boys' bodies will go from being children into adults. They're going to change and develop. And so all of a sudden, a guardian or parent or family member who maybe really didn't pay attention, if you will, to the children, all of a sudden they're aroused sexually. Because that boy or girl, because sexual abuse in children definitely happens to boys in pretty high numbers, that boy or girl has changed and they're more physically attractive to the adult. Whereas this change in body size will churn off pedophiles, because pedophiles are attracted to children's bodies. Therefore, when we go through puberty and we look more like an adult, they're no longer attracted to that person. But for abusers who abuse children, it's typically because they are attracted to them sexually, right? Right, so make sure you go through your clicker slides and kind of learn a little bit more at this chapter, and I will talk to you next time when we talk about adolescence and we talk about what's going on cognitively in their head.